Hello, I'm Robert Fulghum. I'm reading from my book, It Was on Fire When I Lay Down on It, a book that begins with 6 lines that summarize the spirit of the book. I believe that imagination is stronger than knowledge, that myth is more potent than history. I believe that dreams are more powerful than facts, that hope always triumphs over experience, that laughter is the only cure for grief, and I believe that love is stronger than death. Show and tell was the very best part of school for me, both as a student and later in life as a teacher. Not recess, not lunch, but that special time set aside each week for students to bring something important of their own to class to share and to talk about. As a kid, I put more into getting ready for my turn to present than I put into the rest of my homework. Show and tell was real in a way that much of what I learned in school was not. It was education that came out of my life experience. And there weren't a lot of rules about show and tell. You could do your thing without getting red-penciled or gonged to your seat. As a teacher, I was always surprised by what I learned from these amateur hours. For example, a kid I was sure I knew well would reach down into the paper bag he carried and fish out some odd-shaped treasure and attach meaning to it beyond my most extravagant expectation. It was me, the teacher, who was being taught at such moments. Again and again I learned that what I thought was only true for me, only valued by me, only cared about by me, was in fact common property. Show and tell was a bit disorderly and unpredictable. What the presentations lacked in conventional structure, however, was compensated for by passion for the subject at hand. The principles guiding this tape are not far from the spirit of show and tell. It is my stuff from home, that place in my mind and heart where I most truly live. A tabloid newspaper carried the story, stating simply that a small-town emergency squad was summoned to a house where smoke was pouring from an upstairs window. The crew broke in and found a man in a smoldering bed. After rescuing him and dousing the mattress, the obvious question was asked, "How did this happen?" "I don't know," said he. "It was on fire when I lay down on it." The story stuck like a burr to my mental socks and reminded me of a phrase copied into my own journal from a dedication of some book. Quid rides mutato nomine de tu fabula narrator. That's Latin, from the writings of Horace. If you translate it, it says, "Why do you laugh?" Change the name, and the story is told of you. It was on fire when I lay down on it. A lot of us could settle for that on our tombstone. A life story in a sentence. Out of the frying pan into the hot water. I was looking for trouble, and I got into it as soon as I found it. The devil made me do it the first time, and after that, I did it on my own. Or, to point at this truth at a less intense level, I report a conversation with a colleague who was complaining that he had the same damn stuff in his lunch sack day after day after day. "So who makes your lunch?" I asked. "I do," says he. We've got some fine old company in this deal. St. Paul, for example, bemoaned the fact that I cannot understand my own behavior. I fail to carry out the things I want to do, and I find myself doing the very things I hate. The Greek dramatist Euripides puts these words in Medea's mouth just before she murders her own children. "I know what evil I'm about to do. My irrational self is stronger than my resolution." Psychiatrists make a lot of money off this dilemma, and theologians make a lot of noise, but not only is it unresolved, it is unresolvable. One lives with the dilemma, and in the living takes comfort in the company of those who habitually lie down on burning beds of one kind or another. It would be better if we could simply lay claim to the beds we choose as our own and get on with it. Oh, and one more thing about the man in the burning bed in the story. As with most of what we see other people do, we really don't know why they do it. If our own actions are mysteries, How much so others? Why did he lie down on the burning bed? Was he drunk? Ill? Suicidal? Blind? Cold? Dumb? Did he just have a weird sense of humor, or what? I don't know. It's hard to judge without a lot more information. Oh, sure, we go ahead and judge anyhow, but maybe if judgment were suspended a bit more often, we would like us more. God, it is written, warned his first children, Adam and Eve. He made it clear. Don't eat that piece of fruit. It will lead to trouble. And you know, of course, the rest of that story. And part of the rest of that story is here in this tape. The teacher is quiet. He is thinking, I can't believe I am doing this. He pulls on rubber gloves, reaches into a white plastic bag, and pulls out a human brain. A real, no kidding, human brain. The students in the room are very quiet. They are thinking, I can't believe he is really doing this. The students are also thinking, if he hands it to me, I will die, just die. And sure enough, he hands it to them. They do not die. When the brain comes back to him, the teacher tosses it across the table to the rubber-gloved quarterback of the football team, and he tosses it to his rubber-gloved tight end, and there is laughter as the tight end drops the brain on the table, and the brain bounces. To explain, in this beginning drawing class in high school, I had been lecturing about the impact of brain research on the process of art, and we'd use pictures and diagrams and anatomy charts, and we'd even tossed around a cantaloupe to get the feel of the size of a brain, but somehow brains remained a bit abstract. The students had that glazed expression on their faces that meant this is. And in that moment of educational ennui, a freshman girl says, I can bring a human brain to school if you want. My father has lots of them. Talk about a full-scale class alert. She's going to do what? Well, it turns out that her daddy is a bona fide research neurosurgeon at the medical school and has jars and jars of brains in his lab, and he would be pleased to have us see the real thing. So, sure, I can handle this. Bring a brain to school, I shout at the departing class, all of you. And sure enough, a week later, the freshman girl, who is queen forever now of show and tell, shows up with a brain in a bag. Well, Mr. Fulghum, what do you think? What do I think? If ever there was an appropriate use of the word nonplussed, it is now. This is what the students call an ooh-wow moment of monumental proportion. What do I think? I am holding a brain in my hand. Well, I have one of these things between my ears, I said. It is made up entirely of raw meat at the moment. It is fueled by yesterday's bologna sandwich, potato chips, and chocolate milk. And everything I am doing at the moment, everything I have ever done or will do, passes through this lump. I made it. I own it. And it is the most mysterious thing on earth. This brain in my hand wasn't raw, mind you. It had been preserved in formaldehyde, and no, it was not in fact icky or gross, as you might think. It was light beige in color, slightly damp, soft, rubbery, kind of like clay, and just about the size of that cantaloupe we had passed around, only this one weighed almost 3 pounds. Well, now I can kind of understand the mechanical work of the brain, stimulating, breathing, moving blood, directing protein traffic. It's all chemistry and electricity. It's a motor, and I know about motors. But this 3-pound raw meat motor also contains all the limericks I know, a recipe for how to cook a turkey, the remembered smell of my junior high locker room, all my sorrows, the ability to double clutch a pickup truck, the face of my wife when she was young, and formulas like E equals MC squared and A squared plus B squared equals C squared, the prologue to the Canterbury Tales, the sound of the first cry of my firstborn son, the cure for hiccups, the words to the fight song of St. Olaf College, 50 years' worth of dreams, how to tie my shoelaces, and the taste of cod liver oil, There's an image of Van Gogh's sunflowers and a working understanding of the Dewey Decimal System, and it's all there in the meat. 1 cubic centimeter of the brain contains 10 billion bits of information, and it processes at the rate of 5,000 bits a second. And somehow it evolved over a zillion years from a molten ball of rock, Earth, which will itself fall into the sun someday and be no more. Why? How? I don't know. And that's what I think. Ooh, wow, chorused the students. The teacher is in a groove. I got 'em going. Once again, the brain is passed around from hand to hand, slowly, solemnly. Once again, it is very quiet, because the mystery of mysteries is present, and it includes us. The single most powerful statement to come out of brain research in the last 25 years is this: we are as different from one another on the inside of our heads as we appear to be different from one another on the outside of our heads. Let me repeat that. We are as different from one another on the inside of our heads as we appear to be different from one another on the outside of our heads. Look around and see the infinite variety of human heads, skin, hair, age, ethnic characteristics, size, color, shape, and know that on the inside such differences are even greater. What we know, how we learn, how we process information, what we remember and forget, our strategies for functioning and coping, all different. Add to that the understanding that the world out there is as much a projection from inside our heads as it is a perception, and pretty soon you are up against the realization that it is a miracle that we communicate at all. It is almost unbelievable that we are dealing with the same reality. We human beings operate on a kind of loose consensus about existence at best. From a practical point of view, day by day, this kind of information makes me a little more patient with the people I live with. I am less inclined to protest, "Why don't you see it the way I do?" and more inclined to say, "You see it that way? Holy cow, how amazing." This set me to thinking about Einstein's brain, which is, as I understand, somewhere in Missouri in a lab in a jar now. His brain was removed and studied to see if it was special in some way. And no, it wasn't. It wasn't his equipment, but what he did with it that cracked the window on the mystery of mysteries. When old Big Al was in residence at the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton, a guest once asked to be shown Einstein's laboratory, and the great man smiled, held up his fountain pen, pointed at his head. Ooh, wow. The cardboard box is marked "The Good Stuff," and as I write I can see the box where it is stored on a high shelf in my studio. I like being able to see it when I look up. The box contains those odds and ends of personal treasures that have survived many bouts of clean it out and throw it away that seize me from time to time. The box has passed through the screening done as I've moved from house to house and hauled stuff from attic to attic. A thief looking into the box would not take anything. He couldn't get a dime for any of it. But if the house ever catches on fire, the box goes with me when I run. One of the keepsakes in the box is a small paper bag, lunch size. Though the top of the bag is sealed with duct tape, staples, and several paper clips, there is a ragged rip in one side through which the contents may be seen. This particular lunch sack has been in my care for maybe 14 years now, but it really belongs to my daughter, Molly. Soon after she came of school age, she became an enthusiastic participant in packing the morning lunches for herself, her brothers, and me. Each bag got a share of sandwiches, apples, milk money, and sometimes a note or a treat. One morning, Molly handed me 2 bags as I was about to leave. One was a regular lunch sack, And then there was the one with the duct tape and the staples and the paper clips. Why 2 bags? The other one is something else. What's in it? Oh, just some stuff. Take it with you. So, not wanting to hold court over the matter, I stuffed both sacks into my briefcase, kissed the child, and rushed off. At midday, while hurriedly scarfing down my real lunch, I tore open Molly's bag and shook out the contents. 2 hair ribbons, 3 small stones, a plastic dinosaur, a pencil stub, a tiny seashell, 2 animal crackers, a marble, a used lipstick, a small doll, 2 chocolate kisses, and 13 pennies. I smiled. How charming. Rising to hustle off to all the important business of the afternoon, I swept the desk clean into the wastebasket, leftover lunch, Molly's junk, and all. There wasn't anything in there I needed. That evening, Molly came to stand beside me while I was reading the paper. Where's my bag? What bag? You know, the one I gave you this morning. I left it at the office. Why? I forgot to put this note in it. She hands over the note. Besides, I want it back. Why? Those are my things in the sack, Daddy, the ones I really like. I thought you might like to play with them, but now I want them back. You didn't lose the bag, did you, Daddy? Tears puddled in her eyes. Oh, no, I just forgot to bring it home, I lied. Bring it home tomorrow, okay? Sure thing, don't worry. As she hugged my neck with relief, I unfolded the note that had not got into the sack. I love you, Daddy. Oh, and also, uh-oh. I looked long at the face of my child. She was right. What was in that sack was indeed something else. Molly had given me her treasures, all that a 7-year-old held dear, love in a paper sack, and I had missed it. Not only missed it, but had thrown it in the wastebasket because there wasn't anything in there I needed. Oh, dear God. It wasn't the first time, or the last time, I felt my daddy permit was about to run out. It was a long trip back to the office, but there was nothing else to be done, so I went. The pilgrimage of a penitent. And just ahead of the janitor, I picked up the wastebasket and poured the contents out on my desk. I was sorting it all out when the janitor came in to do his chores. Lose something? He asked. Yeah, I lost my mind. It's probably in there all right, he says. What's it look like, and I'll help you find it. I started not to tell him, but I couldn't feel any more of a fool then than I was already, in fact, so I told him. He didn't laugh. He smiled. I got kids, too. So the Brotherhood of Fools searched the trash and found the jewels, and he smiled at me, and I smiled at him. You are never alone in these things, never. And after washing the mustard off the dinosaurs and spraying the whole thing with breath freshener to kill the smell of onions, I carefully smoothed out the wadded ball of the brown paper into a semi-functional bag and put the treasures inside and carried the whole thing home gingerly, like I might carry an injured kitten. And the next evening I returned it to Molly, no questions asked, no explanations offered. The bag didn't look so good, but the stuff was all in there, and that's what counted. After dinner, I asked her to tell me about the stuff in the sack. And so she took it all out, one piece at a time, and placed the objects in a row on the dining room table. It took a long time to tell, for everything had a story or memory, or was attached to dreams and imaginary friends. Fairies had brought some of the things, and I had given her the chocolate kisses, and she had kept them for when she needed them. I managed to say, I see, very wisely several times in the telling, and as a matter of fact, I did see. To my surprise, Molly gave the bag to me once again several days later. Same ratty bag, same stuff inside. I felt forgiven, and trusted, and loved, and a little more comfortable wearing the title of father. Over several months the bag went with me from time to time, and it was never clear to me why I did or did not get it on a given day. I began to think of it as the daddy prize, and I tried very hard to be good the night before, so I might be given it the next morning. In time Molly turned her attention to other things, found other treasures, lost interest in the game, grew up, something, but me, I was left holding the bag, for she gave it to me one morning and never asked for its return, and so I have it still. Sometimes I think of all the times in this sweet life when I must have missed the affection I was being given. A friend calls this standing knee-deep in the river and dying of thirst. And so the worn paper sack is there in the box on the shelf, left over from a time when a child said, "Here, this is the best I've got. Take it, it's yours. Such as I have, give I thee." I missed it the first time, but it's my bag now. What I am about to say fits in some place between the Ten Commandments and Murphy's Law. God, you will recall, invited old Moses up on a tall mountain in the desert and handed him a couple of solid gold memos with some powerful words on them. Commandments. God didn't say, "Hey, here are 10 pretty good ideas, see what you think." No, commandments. Do it or take the consequences. Murphy, at the other extreme, was the ultimate good-humored human cynic who said that no matter what you do, it's probably not going to work out very well anyhow. And some people think that Murphy was an optimist. As a middle ground, I offer Fulghum's recommendations. These are items not touched on by God or Murphy, really, either as ironclad as the first 10 or as despairing as the endless variations on Murphy. And note that there are only 9 in my list. I'm still working on the 10th or the 11th for that matter. 1. Buy lemonade from any kid who is selling. 2. Anytime you can vote on anything, vote. 3. Attend the 25th reunion of your high school class. 4. Choose having time over having money. 5. Always take the scenic route. 6. Give at least something to any beggar who asks. And 7. Give money to all street musicians. 8. Always be someone's Valentine. And 9. When the circus comes to town, be there. Fulghum's recommendations. This is a story about a father and a son, and it begins in 1963. From deep in the canyoned aisles of a supermarket comes what sounds like a small-scale bus wreck followed by an air raid. If you followed the running box boy armed with mop and broom, you would come upon a young father, his 3-year-old son, an upturned shopping cart, and a good part of the pickles shelf, all in a heap on the floor. The child, who sits on a plastic bag of ripe tomatoes, is experiencing what might nicely be described as a significant fluid loss. Tears, mixed with mucus from a runny nose, mixed with blood from a small forehead abrasion, mixed with saliva drooling from a mouth that is wide open and making a noise that would drive a dog under a bed. The kid has also wet his pants and will likely throw up before this little tragedy reaches bottom. He has that stand back, here it comes look of a child in the pre-ERP condition. The small lake of pickle juice surrounding the child doesn't make rescue any easier for the supermarket 911 squad arriving on the scene. Now the child is not hurt, and the father has had some experience with the uselessness of the stop crying or I'll smack you syndrome and has remained amazingly quiet and still in the face of the catastrophe. The father is calm because he is thinking about running away from home right now, just walking away, getting into the car, driving away somewhere down south, changing his name, getting a job as a paperboy or a cook in an all-night diner, something, anything that doesn't involve contact with 3-year-olds. Oh, sure, someday he may find all this amusing, but in the most private part of his heart, he is sorry he has children, sorry he married, sorry he grew up, and above all, sorry that this particular son cannot be traded in for a model that works. He will not and cannot say these things to anybody ever, but they are there, and they are not funny. The box boy and the manager and the accumulated spectators are terribly sympathetic and consoling. And later the father sits in his car in the parking lot, holding the sobbing child in his arms until the child sleeps. He drives home, carries the child up to his crib, and tucks him in. The father looks at the sleeping child for a long time, and the father does not run away from home. Now we are 15 years later in this story. It is 1978. The same man paces my living room, carelessly cursing and weeping by turns. In his hand is what's left of a letter which has been crumpled into a ball and then uncrumpled again several times. The letter is from his 18-year-old son, the same son we talked about earlier, the pride of his father's eye, or was until today's mail. The son says he hates him and never wants to see him again. The son is going to run away from home because of his terrible father. The son thinks the father is a failure as a parent. The son thinks the father is a jerk. What the father thinks of the son right now is somewhat incoherent, but it isn't nice. Outside, it is a lovely day, the first day of spring. But inside the house, it is more apocalypse now, the first day of one man's next stage of fathering. The old gray ghost of Oedipus has just stomped through his life. Oh, someday, some long day from now, he may laugh about even this. For the moment, there is only anguish. He really is a good man and a fine father. The evidence of that is overwhelming, and the son is quality goods as well, just like his father, they say. Why did this happen to me? The father shouts at the ceiling. Well, he had a son. That's all it takes. And it doesn't do any good to explain about that right now. First, you have to live through it. Wisdom comes later. You just have to stand there like a jackass in a hailstorm and take it. The story picks up again in 1988. Same man, same son. The son is 28 now, married with his own 3-year-old son. Home, career, all the rest, and the father is 50. 3 mornings a week I see them out jogging together around 6 a.m. As they cross a busy street, I see the son look both ways with a hand on his father's elbow to hold him back from the danger of oncoming cars, protecting him from harm. And I hear them laughing as they run on up the hill into the morning, and when they sprint toward home, the son doesn't run ahead. He runs alongside his father at his pace. They love each other a lot. You can see it. And they are very careful of each other. They have been through a lot together, but it's all right now. One of their favorite stories is about once upon a time in a supermarket. The story is now also. The story is always. It's been lived thousands of times over thousands of years, and literature is full of examples of tragic endings to the story, including that of Oedipus. The sons leave, kick away, burn all the bridges, never to be seen again. But sometimes, more often than not I suspect, sometimes they come back in their own way and in their own time and take their own fathers in their arms. That ending is an old one too. The father of the prodigal son could tell you. In most American high schools, there is someone who teaches driver training, the top sergeant of automotive boot camp. It's a thankless task, a low-status job, about in the same league with the typing teacher as far as the faculty pecking order is concerned. The driver trainer is something of a non-person on campus. The parents of students never meet the DT. The students see the DT as a necessary evil, one more adult whose bottom they must kiss in order to get something they want. It's a job that anybody with half a brain could do, and anybody who wants the job doesn't have much ambition or talent or skill. Maybe. Nevertheless, I would like to teach driver training for a while. It would be an honor, now that I see it the way old Mr. Perry sees it. The students call him that, old Mr. Perry. They also call him the Driving Master and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Since the latter name refers to the Wise One in the Star Wars trilogy, I asked some students the reason, and they said, "Take a ride and see," and so I did. Jack Perry, very average in appearance, not tall or short or fat or thin or old or young or straight or weird, kind of generic. You'd not notice him on the street or pick him out of a police lineup for ever having done anything remarkable. He's a former Navy Chief Petty Officer, retired, one wife, 4 kids, all grown, Protestant, tends his garden for pleasure, likes cars and kids, and so he's the driver trainer. Now it seems fair and useful to say that the conversation that follows is a reconstruction in my mind of what went on between us. What I'm sharing is the spirit of the interchange. A taciturn man, Jack Perry actually said much less than I am reporting, because he would begin a thought and then wave his hand and say, "You know the rest of that." I showed him this text, and he said it was a lot prettier than he actually talked, but he wouldn't disagree with it. Part of why the kids like him, by the way, is that he listens a whole lot more than he talks. "So you are the man who teaches driver training?" "Well, that's my job title, yes." "I'd like to know what you really do. The students say you are one of the really fine people around school, a truly maximum dude, to quote one." "You really want to know?" "I really want to know." I guess this sounds presumptuous, but I think of myself as a shaman, one who is involved in helping young men and women move through a rite of passage, and my job is getting them to think about this time in their lives. Most of them are almost 16, and they know a lot more about life and sex and alcohol and drugs and money than their parents or their teachers give them credit for, and they are a lot more grown up and knowledgeable about the world than they get credit for, and they are physically pretty much what they're going to be. But we don't have any cultural rituals to acknowledge this. There's no ceremony, changing of clothes or roles or public statement that says, "This isn't a kid anymore, this is a young adult." The only thing we do is give them a driver's license. But that's really important. Learning to drive a car means you move out of the back seat and into the driver's seat. You aren't a passenger anymore. Now you're in charge. You can go where you want to go. You have power now. So that's what we talk about, that power. But what about actually learning to operate a vehicle? Oh, that comes easily enough. Some driving time with suggestions, reading the manual. See, they want it all enough to work at it on their own. But I don't talk much about that. They have to pass a test, and it usually takes care of itself. So what do you talk about when you're out driving? We talk about that power, opportunity, responsibility, about dreams, hopes, fears, about someday and what if. I listen a lot, mostly. I'm not a parent, I'm not a school teacher or a neighbor or a shrink, and they hardly ever see me except when it's just the two of us out in the car cruising around. So I'm safe to talk to. They tell me about love and money and plans, and they ask me what it was like when I was their age and what I wish I knew back then that I know now. Sometimes they ask me about the Navy, and I tell them about the sea and the wide world and the stars at night. We even talk about God, life and death sometimes, but mostly I listen. I read somewhere about the Indians who had a special person whose job it was to explain to the young men about what's involved in being a brave member of the tribe, and I like to think that's kind of what I do. My job is to help the young into the tribe in a way that's good for the tribe as well as for them. I know it sounds corny, but it's what I do to make the world a better place. Will you take me out for a ride? My driving could be improved. And so we went, and so it was. My driving was improved along with my sense of place and purpose. This experience with Old Man Perry, the driving master, emphasizes the profound truth of a story that's been around a long time. If you don't know the story, it's time you heard it, and if you know it, you ought to hear it again once in a while. The story says that a traveler from Italy came to the French town of Chartres to see the great church that was being built there. Arriving at the end of the day, he went to the site just as the workmen were leaving for home. He asked one man, covered with dust, what he did there. The man replied that he was a stonemason. He spent his days carving rocks. Another man, when asked, said he was a glass blower who spent his days making slabs of colored glass. And still another workman replied that he was a blacksmith who pounded iron for a living. Wandering into the deepening gloom of the unfinished edifice, the traveler came upon an older woman, armed with a broom, sweeping up the stone chips and wood shavings and glass shards from the day's work. "And what are you doing?" he asked. The woman paused, leaning on her broom, looked up toward the high arches, replied, "Me? I'm building a cathedral for the glory of Almighty God." I've often thought about the people of Chartres. They began something they knew they would never see completed. They built for something larger than themselves. They had a magnificent vision. And for Jack Perry, it is the same. He will never see his students grow up. Few teachers do. But from where he is and with what he has, he serves a vision of how the world ought to be. That old woman of Chartres was a spiritual ancestor of the man who teaches driver training, who is building a cathedral to the human enterprise in his own quiet way. From him, the kids learn both to drive a car and drive a life with care. A friend of mine doesn't like the essay, "All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten." He says it's nice as far as it goes, but it doesn't go far enough. Thinks it should go beyond nice. And he's right. There are things I learned and needed to learn that were not taught in primary school. Oh, teachers and adults would never tell you these things. They knew them all right, but they would never tell you they knew. You had to find them out for yourself or from your friends. The ultimate source of this kind of information was the snake in the Garden of Eden. I'm talking about the forbidden fruit of the tree of knowledge. "Try it, you'll like it," whispered the snake. To eat of it is always trouble, and not to eat is not to be fully human. Now there are two parts to this body of knowledge. Those things I learned before I was 13 and what I know now. Some of these things I wanted to know. Some I did not. As my friend Lucy puts it, now that I am grown up, I sometimes wish I didn't know now what I didn't know then. For example, sex. I learned that girls are different from boys, that there is a terrifying ecstasy in playing "I'll show you mine if you'll show me yours." I learned that four-letter words about sex have awesome power, and if you write those words on walls, adults will go crazy. Or crime. I learned about crime, how to take money out of my mother's purse, and how to get into and out of places I wasn't supposed to get into and out of. Lock cupboards at home, for example, or school buildings after hours. And what's more, I learned that no matter what my mother said, sometimes you get away with it. You don't always get caught. Furthermore, I learned to lie sometimes if I did get caught, because sometimes they would actually believe me. And if they didn't believe me, I could say, I don't know why I did it. Sometimes they believed that. But if the alibi didn't work and they punished me, it wasn't ever really as bad as they said it was going to be. And if I was going to have to suffer consequences anyhow, I might as well do some things that made it worth the trouble. Remorseful crying afterwards was also useful. It broke their hearts. And God, no matter what they said, God is not watching you all the time. On the other hand, if you pray real hard, sometimes God will hear you and even make a deal with you. You may have to be good for a while to get what you want, but it may be worth it. I almost destroyed my third-grade teacher this way. I prayed for her to get sick, and she did, over and over and over. I learned about power. Might not make right somewhere in the world, but in our neighborhood, the big boys always had the first and the last word. I learned that hitting people was sometimes necessary to bring people into line. Didn't my folks hit me? The basic rule was clear, however. Always hit someone smaller than you. And skills. I learned how to spit between my teeth, about how much fun it was to play with matches, and how to play poker, and how to cheat to win. I learned how to sneak out of my house, where to get a key duplicated, and how to drive the car up and down the driveway when my folks weren't home. And death. Not only did I discover that things could die, but I could kill them. Bugs, lizards, worms, and mice. Old people died, but since I would never get old, I would never die. That's what I learned before I was 13. And now, what do I know now? Well, for one thing, the last item in the list is false. I did grow up to be old enough to know I, too, will die. And I became one of those parents. My own children have themselves passed through kindergarten and their own back alley education, though my older son is a man now. Only 23 years separate us, and we are both able to talk about our childhood without total embarrassment. He knows now about the snake. He tells me all the rotten things he did behind my back when he was a kid, and I tell him all the things I knew he was doing, but which I ignored because I didn't want to deal with the problem considering what I had done at the same age. I guess being a parent forces you into a kind of benevolent hypocrisy. Goes with the job. But it is comforting for the two of us to confess to each other. It clears the air between us, makes us people to each other. Here's the tough part of what I know now, that the lessons of kindergarten are awfully hard to practice if they don't apply to you. It's hard to share everything and to play fair if you don't have anything to share, and life is itself unjust. I think of the children of this earth who see the world through barbed wire, who live in a filthy, rubbled mess not of their own making, and which they can never clean up. They do not wash their hands before they eat. There is no water, no soap, and some do not have hands to wash. They don't know about warm cookies and cold milk, only stale scraps and hunger. And they have no blankie to wrap themselves in, and do not take naps because it is too dangerous to close their eyes. Theirs is not the kindergarten of finger paint and nursery rhymes, but an X-rated school of harsh dailiness. Their teachers are not sweet women who care, but the indifferent instructors called pain, fear, and misery. Like all children everywhere, these children tell stories of monsters, but theirs are for real, what they have seen with their own eyes, in broad daylight. We don't want to know what they have learned, but we know, and it ain't kindergarten stuff. The line between good and evil, between hope and despair, does not divide the world between us and them. It runs down the middle of every one of us, some more than others. I do not want to talk about what you understand about this world. I want to know what you will do about it. I don't want to know what you hope. I want to know what you will work for. I don't want your sympathy for the needs of humanity. I want your muscle. As the wagon driver said when they came to a long, hard hill, them that's going on with us, get out and push. Them that ain't, get out of the way. Are there any questions? That's an offer that comes at the end of college lectures and long meetings, said when an audience is not only overdosed with information, but when there is no time left anyhow. At times like that, you sure do have questions like, can we leave now, and what the hell was this meeting for, and where can I get a drink? The gesture is supposed to indicate openness on the part of the speaker, I suppose. But if in fact you do ask a question, both the speaker and the audience will give you drop-dead looks. But some fool, some earnest idiot, always seems to ask, and of course the speaker always answers, and by repeating most of what he's already said. But if there is a little time left, and there is a little silence in response to the invitation, I usually ask the most important question of all. What is the meaning of life? You never know. Somebody may have the answer, and I'd really hate to miss it because I was too socially inhibited to ask. But when I ask, it's usually taken as some kind of absurdist dada move. People laugh, nod, gather up their stuff, and the meeting is dismissed on that ridiculous note. Once, and only once, I asked that question and got a serious answer, one that is with me still. First, I must tell you where this happened, because the place has a power of its own. Near the village of Gonya, on a rocky bay on the island of Crete, sits a Greek Orthodox monastery. Alongside it, on land donated by the monastery, is an institute dedicated to human understanding and peace, and especially to rapprochement between Germans and Cretans. An improbable task, given the bitter residue of wartime. This site is very important because it overlooks the small airstrip of Malmö, where Nazi paratroopers invaded Crete and were attacked by peasants wielding kitchen knives and hay scythes. The retribution was terrible. The population of whole villages were lined up and shot for assaulting Hitler's finest troops. High above the institute is a cemetery with a single cross marking the mass grave of Cretan partisans. And across the bay, on yet another hill, is the regimented burial ground of the Nazi paratroopers. The memorials are so placed that all might see and never forget. Hate was the only weapon the Cretans had at the end, and it was a weapon many vowed never to give up. Never, ever. Now against this heavy curtain of history, and this place where the stone of hatred is hard and thick, the existence of an institute devoted to healing the wounds of war is a fragile paradox. And the question is, how has it come to be here? And the answer is simple: a man named Christos Papaderos, a doctor of philosophy, a teacher, politician, resident of Athens, but a son of this soil. At war's end, he came to believe that the Germans and the Cretans had much to give one another, much to learn from one another. He came to believe that they had an example to set, for if they could forgive each other and construct a creative relationship, then any people could. Well, to make a lovely story short, Papaderos succeeded. The institute became a reality, a conference ground on the site of horror, and it was in fact a source of productive interaction between the two countries. Books have been written on the dreams that were realized by what people gave to people here at the Institute. By the time I came to the Institute for a summer session, Christos Papaderos had become a living legend. One look at him and you saw his strength and intensity, his energy, physical power, courage, intelligence, a passion and vivacity. And to speak to him, to shake his hand, to be in a room with him when he spoke, was to experience his extraordinary, electric humanity. Few men live up to their reputations when you get close. Christos Papaderos was an exception. At the last session on the last morning of a 2-week seminar on Greek culture, led by intellectuals and experts in their fields who were recruited by Papaderos from across Greece, Papaderos rose from his chair at the back of the room, walked to the front, where he stood in the bright Greek sunlight of an open window, and looked out. We followed his gaze across the bay to the iron cross marking the German cemetery. He paused. He turned, made the ritual gesture. Well, are there any questions? Quiet quilted the room. These 2 weeks had generated enough questions for a lifetime, but for now, there was only appropriate silence. No questions, Papaderos swept the room with his eyes. So I asked, Dr. Papaderos, what is the meaning of life? The usual laughter followed. People stirred to go, but Papaderos held up his hand and stilled the room and looked at me for a long time, asking with his eyes if I was serious, and seeing from my eyes that yes, I was. I will answer that question. Taking his wallet out of his hip pocket, he fished into a leather fold and brought out a very small round mirror, about the size of a quarter. And what he said went like this. When I was a child, during the war, we were very poor, and we lived in a remote village. One day on the road I found the broken pieces of a mirror. A German motorcycle had been wrecked in that place. I tried to find all the pieces and put them together, but it was not possible, so I kept only the largest piece, this one, and by scratching it on a stone, I made it round. I began to play with it as a toy, became fascinated by the fact that I could reflect light into dark places where the sun would never shine, into deep holes and crevices and dark closets. It became a game for me to get light into the most inaccessible places I could find. And so I kept the little mirror, and as I went about my growing up, I would take it out in idle moments and continue the challenge of the game. As I became a man, I grew to understand that this was not just a child's game, but a metaphor for what I might do with my life. I came to understand that I am not the light or the source of light, but light, meaning truth, understanding, knowledge, is there, and it will only shine in many dark places if I reflect it. I know now as a man that I am a fragment of a mirror whose whole design and shape I do not know. Nevertheless, with what I have, I can reflect light into the dark places of this world, into the black places in the hearts of men, and change some things in some people. And perhaps others may see and do likewise. This is what I am about. This is the meaning of my life. And then he took his small mirror, and holding it very carefully, caught the bright rays of daylight streaming through the window and reflected them onto my face and onto my hands folded there on the desk. You know, much of what I experienced in the way of information about Greek culture and history that summer is long gone from my memory. But in the wallet of my mind, I carry a small round mirror still. Are there any questions? Well, so, what is it you do? This is the basic strangers on a plane question. Comes up also at PTA potlucks and the corporate cocktail party and just about any other stand around and make small talk situation you get into. It's a politely veiled status inquiry to clarify social standing. The bureaucratic version of the question is terse. Fill in the blank marked occupation. The IRS wants it that way, and the policeman giving you a ticket, the passport agency, and the bank. Say what you are paid to do, and we will know who you are and how to deal with you. When I ask people what they do, I usually get a stiff little piece of 3.5 by 2 inch paper that summarizes their identity. Name, company, name, title, address, and lots of numbers: phone, telex, cable, and fax. Business card. If you don't have a business card these days, you are, well, not to be taken too seriously, though I sometimes think the truth may be vice versa. For example, a fellow traveler's card said he was Vice President for Systems Analysis of Unico. Well, so what is it you really do? I asked, and he pointed at his title as if I had overlooked it. But I asked again, I mean, if I followed you around all day long, what would I see you actually doing? He talked for a long time. I still do not really know what he does, and I am not sure he knows either. And when it was my turn, well, I had no business card. I can't seem to get me down on that little piece of paper. What I do is a kind of complicated thing, and it takes such a long time to explain that I often avoid the question and just pick something simple that's true, but not quite the whole truth. Even this tactic has left me painted into some difficult corners. For example, on an early morning flight to San Francisco, I told my seatmate that I was a janitor, thinking that she might not want to pursue that and would leave me to read my book. And when I think of how I have spent my life and how much of it involves cleaning and straightening and hauling trash, I don't get paid for it, but that's what I do a lot. But anyhow, she was fascinated. It turned out that she wrote a housewives column for a small newspaper and was glad to spend the rest of the flight sharing her tips for tidy housekeeping with me. Now I know more about getting spots and stains out of rugs than I ever hoped to know. It turned out that she was a member of the church where I was to speak on the following Sunday, and I didn't know that until I stood up in the pulpit and saw her there in the third row. And it further turned out that she knew who I was all along, but was creative enough to think that if I wanted to go around on airplanes pretending to be a janitor, then I probably had a reason, and it was okay for her. Another time I was bumped into first class on a flight to Thailand. I was seated next to a very distinguished-looking Sikh gentleman. Lots of expensive jewelry, fine clothes, gold teeth. Probably a high-caste bazaar merchant, I thought. When he asked me the "what do you do" question, I replied off the top of my head that I was a neurosurgeon. "Oh, how wonderful," he said with delight. "So am I." And he was. A real one. It took a while to unscramble things, but we had a wonderful conversation all the way to Bangkok. But I must confess that for 10 seconds there the temptation to be also deaf and dumb had been great. Having learned my lesson, the next time I got on a plane and sat down beside someone who looked sympathetic, I told these stories and then suggested we play a game, just for the fun of it, and each make up our occupation and pretend all the way to Chicago. And the guy went for it. He declared he was a spy, and I decided I'd be a nun. And we had a hell of a time, one of the great conversations of my life. He said he couldn't wait until his wife asked him, "Well, dear, how was your flight?" And he could say, "Well, there was this nun dressed in a tweed suit." But it was the middle-aged couple from Green Bay who had occupied the seats behind us who were really blown away. They had listened to the nun and the spy in stunned silence, and they really had something to say when someone asked them, "How was your flight?" As the man passed me in the concourse, he turned and said, "Have a nice day, sister." Filling in forms has led to similar situations. At my bank, I wrote "Prince" in the blank for occupation on an IRA document. Just that morning my wife had said to me, "Fulghum, sometimes you are a real prince." And sometimes I am, so, since I was feeling princely, I put it in the blank. The clerk couldn't handle it, and we had a friendly argument right there that is at the heart of this matter of identity. Is my occupation what I get paid money for, or is it something larger and wider and richer, more a matter of what I am or how I think about myself? Making a living and having a life are not the same thing. Making a living and making a life that's worthwhile are not the same thing. Living the good life and living a good life are not the same thing. and a job title doesn't even come close to answering the question, what do you do? Marcel Duchamp, whom most people think of as a fixture in the world of fine art during the period before 1940, was equally frustrated by the implications of the standard inquiry. And he would answer, I am a respirateur, or breather. He explained that he did more breathing than anything else and was very, very good at it too, and after that people were usually afraid to ask him what else he did. I know. We can't go around handing out 200-page autobiographies every time someone asks for minimal information, but suppose that instead of answering that question with what we do to get money, we replied with what we do that gives us pleasure, makes us feel useful to the human enterprise. If you happen to get paid to do what you love, feel very fortunate, but a lot of people don't. If you shift the scale a bit and answer the what do you do question in terms of how you spend a normal 24-hour day, one might say, in my case, for example, I am a sleeper or a napper, one who sleeps and is very good at it. If ever there is an Olympic event for napping, I will go for the gold. For 8 hours in 24, I am asleep in my bed, and every afternoon I take a 30-minute nap. Sleeping occupies more than 1/3 of my life. If I live to be 75 years old, I will have spent more than 25 years, night and day, asleep. No other activity commands so much of my time in one place. While asleep, I cause no one else any pain or trouble, and it is an ecologically sound activity. If I got paid for how well I do it, I would be a very rich man indeed. I think it would be a better world if more people got more sleep, or at least spent more time in bed. There are people I don't like very much when they are awake, but I think quite fondly of them while they are sleeping, drooling into their pillows. Had you asked me the dooby-doo-be-doo question today, I would have said I am a singer. Not only do I not get paid to sing, but in some cases friends might offer to pay me not to sing. Nevertheless, I love to do it. I sing in the shower, driving to work, while I'm working, walking to lunch, and along with whatever I recognize on the radio. I sing. It is what I do. Unfortunately, God did not put my desire together with the necessary equipment. My voice is what you might politely call uncertain. I can hear the music in my head, but I cannot reproduce what I have heard, though it sounds fine to me. Over a lifetime of trying out for leads in musicals, I have always been told that I would be best in the chorus. And then I got eliminated from the chorus because there were always too many of whatever it is I am. I really liked being a parent to my children when they were young and had no musical standards and would uncritically sing with me hour after hour. It didn't matter that we didn't always know all the words or have the tune just right. We made it up. We singers are not thrown by technicalities. Singers are those who sing. Period. Sometimes when asked the what do you do question, it occurs to me to say that I work for the government. I have a government job, essential to national security. I am a citizen. Like the Supreme Court judges, my job is for life, and the well-being of my country depends on me. It seems fair to think that I should be accountable for my record in office in the same way I expect accountability from those who seek elected office. I would like to be able to say that I can stand on my record, and I am proud of it. What I do is literally how I spend my time. As of this telling in the fall of 1988, I figure in my life so far I have spent 35,000 hours eating, 30,000 hours in traffic getting from one place to another, 2,508 hours brushing my teeth, 870,000 hours just coping with odds and ends, filling out forms, mending, repairing, paying bills, getting dressed and undressed, reading papers, attending committee meetings, being sick, and all that kind of stuff. And 217,000 hours at work. There's not a whole lot left over when you get finished with adding and subtracting. The good stuff has to be fitted in somewhere, or else the good stuff has to come at the very same time we do all the rest of the stuff. Which is why I often say that I don't worry about the meaning of life. I can't handle that big stuff. What concerns me is the meaning in life, day by day, hour by hour, while I'm doing whatever it is that I do. What counts is not what I do, but how I think about myself while I'm doing it. In truth, I have a business card now. Finally figured out what to put on it. One word, Fulghum. That's my occupation. And when I give it away, it leads to fine conversations. What I do is to be the most Fulghum I can be at any one time, which means being a son, a father, a husband, a friend, a singer, dancer, eater, breather, sleeper, janitor, dishwasher, bather, swimmer, runner, walker, artist, writer, painter, teacher, preacher, citizen, poet, counselor, neighbor, dreamer, wisher, laugher, traveler, pilgrim, and on and on. I and you, we, are infinite, rich, large, contradictory, living, breathing miracles, free human beings, children of God and the everlasting universe, and that's what we do. Americans, it is observed, prefer definite answers. Let your yea be your yea, and your nay be your nay. Yes or no. No grays, please. In Indonesia, however, there is a word in common use that nicely wires around the need for blacks and whites. Belum is the word, and it means not quite yet. A lovely word implying continuing possibility. Do you speak English? Belum. Not quite yet. Do you have any children? Belum. Do you know the meaning of life? Belum. It is considered both impolite and cynical to say no outright to important questions. This leads to some funny moments. Is the taxi on fire? Belum. Not quite yet. It's an attitude kin to that behind the old vaudeville joke. Do you play the violin? I don't know. I never tried. Perhaps, maybe, possibly, not yes or no, but within the realm of what might be. Soft edges are welcome in this great bus ride of human adventure. Is this the best of all possible worlds? Belum. Not quite yet. Is the world coming to an end? Belum. Will we live happily ever after? Belum. Can we do without the weapons of war? I don't know. We never tried. Is it hopeless to think we might? Belum. Not yet. Like many Westerners in the late 1960s, I wanted to be somewhere else in my religious journey. Confusion reigned in the kingdom of my mind, and I yearned to construct a framework of understanding that seemed somehow beyond my present cultural tools. I couldn't seem to get there from here. Zen and its idea of enlightenment appealed greatly to me, that one might sit very still and empty one's mind and suddenly be hit by a mighty wave of comprehension beyond words. Well, that would do. Hit me with the big news and let me walk away with a sense of I get it. So I took a leave of absence from my dailiness, and I went off to Japan to get Zen'd properly. I got connected to a temple and a master, shaved my head and face, put on the drab gray robe of the novitiate, and stood in line to get enlightened. I figured to become a pretty holy man in short order, like in about 6 weeks, which was when my return ticket home expired. Right, of course. It was not to be. Sitting still gave me hallucinations and cramps, but not enlightenment. The food gave me diarrhea. Sleeping on a board gave me backache, and my fellow monks treated me like a Western fool, laughing at me behind my back. It was one of those times when you know enough to realize there's something everybody but you knows, but you don't know enough to know exactly what it is you don't know. but I did know it was time to leave. To my surprise, an invitation was extended for an interview with the master of the temple. This is like a stockboy being asked to have lunch with the president of the company. Since it was largely because of his reputation that I had chosen this particular temple, and since he rarely spent time with tourists like me, the master's invitation seemed a special honor. His name was Manabu Kohara, Ph.D. in economics from Tokyo University, solver of all the Zen mind puzzles, advisor to captains of industry, writer of books, speaker of 7 foreign languages. He was a paradigm of the great teacher, wise, good, respected, accomplished. If he didn't have it all figured out, then nobody did. After I was ushered into his private study, we knelt on cushions and bowed our mutual respect. He out of courtesy, I out of awe. For a long time he looked at me and into me. And then very deliberately he shifted his weight to one knee and just as deliberately reached for his backside and scratched himself in that way and in that place your mother told you was a no-no in public. I have hemorrhoids, he said. My butt itches. Now there was nothing in my mental manual as to how to reply to such an opening remark, so I kept my mouth shut and pretended to be thoughtful. The hemorrhoids come from stress, you know, from worrying about tourists burning down this fire trap of a temple, from worrying about trying to get enough funding from businessmen to keep it in repair, from arguing with my wife and children who are not as holy, he smiled, as I am, and from despairing over the quality of the lazy young fools who want to be priests nowadays. Sometimes I think I would like to get a little place in Hawaii and just play golf for the rest of my life. He leaned to one side, scratched himself again. It was this way before I was enlightened, you know, and now it is the same after enlightenment. A long pause while he silently gave me time to consider his words and his actions. Rising, he motioned me to follow him to the entrance alcove of the temple, and we stood before an ancient scroll I had often passed. He said it was time for me to go home, where he felt I had been a thirsty man looking for a drink, and all the while standing knee-deep in a flowing stream. Yes, I understood about that. And then he read the words of the scroll slowly, first in Japanese, and then carefully translated into English. There is really nothing you must be, and there is nothing you must do. There is really nothing you must have, and there is nothing you must know. There is really nothing you must become. However, it helps to understand that fire burns, and when it rains, the earth gets wet. Whatever, he said, there are consequences. Nobody is exempt. And with a wink, he turned, he walked away, carefully scratching his backside. In the beginning of books, and at the end of movies, there appear the credits, list of those to whom recognition and appreciation are due, without whom the book or movie was not possible. And in that spirit, as one summer ends, I write my own credits for that summer. These people, and some bugs and dogs, made life sing for me with unknowing gifts. So thanks to the large man in the red dump truck for the mercy of not blowing his air horn at me while I sat daydreaming through a green light. And thanks to the small puppy dog trying desperately to make love to a much larger senior lady dog, reminding me that high hopes are part of passion and that lust is often blind. The patient toleration of the object of his affection is likewise applauded. What harm? And thanks to the fat, waffled, wrinkled, graying old lady in the faded blue bathing suit, sitting in the children's wading pool in the park on the hottest day of the summer taking on all comers in a splashing contest, for reminding me of what real beauty is and that childhood can be forever. Thanks to the small boy in the grocery store who grabbed me from behind around my knees and hugged me and called me Daddy, and who hugged me once more even when he saw I wasn't his daddy, for handing out free samples of small joy. And thanks to whoever planted marigolds in the parking strip on 15th Avenue, not content with making a small piece of no man's land beautiful, you added the sign that said, "Flowers, have some." And thanks to the 3 young white women playing heads up, in your face, knees and elbows and take no prisoners hard hat basketball with the young black court hotshots one morning by the lake. And thanks to the young black court hotshots who picked the girls for their team in the first place because they could really play basketball. Thanks to all for showing me that the ERA is not dead in all the courts of the land. Thanks to ex-President Jimmy Carter for spending his summer rebuilding houses for poor people with the Humana Group. The value of your presidency is still to be judged by history, but the powerful example of your character shines now. I thank the 4 deaf people speaking sign language at the market that Saturday, who I knew were telling jokes, I don't know how, but I knew, for including me in the laughter without words. Thanks too to the Dixieland band that showed up to play in the park that Sunday afternoon just for the fun of it, and played as if it were a birthday party for everyone on earth, for making me forget that people die. Thanks to the old geezer playing the harmonica in front of the drugstore downtown, who, when asked where to put money, said he didn't do it for the money but for the company, and wore a t-shirt that said, "Over the hill and on a roll." Thanks to him for making me look forward to getting older. A special thanks to the flat-chested young woman at the swimming hole who bravely stood her ground while the policeman wrote her a ticket for indecent exposure for going without her top. And thanks to the policeman who didn't insult her by leaving her out of the arrest procedure when handing out tickets to the more amply endowed, for keeping dignity alive and part of justice. I thank the mailman in my old neighborhood who still remembers my name long after I moved away, for delivering friendliness first and the mail second. Thanks too to the disabled man riding in the electric wheelchair with the sign on the back, "Honk if you're horny," for reminding me of the courage of great good humor. I also thank the spiders of August who kept me walking slowly and alert and aware through my garden, morning and evening, for making me see their work and think about my own. Thanks also to the old mongrel dog that came and sat quietly beside me one morning by the lake, for selecting me to receive his silent, undemanding company. I was honored he would sit by me. Thanks to the janitor who sings in the halls of the building where I work, for putting "keep on the sunny side" in my mind at day's end. I thank the service station attendant who washed my car windows anyway, even though I was at the self-service pump, for reminding me that I should not go around not seeing all there is to see. And there is more. The gifts of the summer were abundant, and there is more news of the world than is reported in the daily paper, and the news is good, and the gifts are free. There is a bench in the city where I live. Its structure is very simple. Just 3 slabs of smooth gray granite, each 6 inches thick. The seat part is 16 inches wide by 42 inches long, and the 2 supporting legs are 16 inches high. Having checked with a compass to be certain, I can tell you that the bench has been carefully aligned so that its long sides face east and west, and its 2 ends point north and south. This sturdy seat was placed with purpose on the highest ground, on the highest hill in my city, so that when the sky is clear on a summer's morning, you can see almost 60 miles in 3 directions while sitting on the bench. West lies Puget Sound, East the mighty Cascades run free, north is the university, south a great tree. All these things were loved by me. These words are chiseled into the edge of the bench and are an epitaph. For the bench is in fact a tombstone in a cemetery, and I would take you there to sit if I only could. You wouldn't feel uncomfortable sitting on it, I promise. You wouldn't even notice what it was at first. It's right on the edge of a paved lane that curves through the burial grounds, placed so that you are clearly invited to sit on it. The closest living thing is a dawn redwood tree, comforting in its great age and size, a stout, worthy companion. The placement of this bench, the words on the edge, the consciousness of the view, all say that someone went to a lot of trouble to be useful in death. A parting gesture of quiet generosity has been made. In over 25 years as a clergyman, I have been involved in hundreds of funerals, in the dying that went before, the burial that came after. There is an inevitable narcissism therein, a focus on self. What I want for my funeral, and what I want done with my body, and what I want for my epitaph. A very human holding on to identity as long as breath and granite last. The monuments left behind in the hallowed ground serve to separate the dead from the living, and oddly enough, the dead from one another. For me, tombstones are markers of loneliness. But this bench I speak of is another story. It's unique. There's no name, no conventional epitaph, and no dates. Just an unspoken, open invitation for anyone to sit and think. What marks this grave is the gift of silent companionship that bridges loneliness. In all the cemeteries I have visited around the world, I have seen nothing like it, and nothing so fine. That bench has become a spiritual retreat for me over the years, and I know that I am not the only one to use it. For once I found a note taped under the bench, not for me, but for a young woman from a young man who was in love with her and wrote her careless poetry with great passion. No, I'm not sorry I snooped, and yes, I put it back as I found it, and no, I didn't hide in the bushes to see who came for the note. Secret lovers have enough to worry about as it is. Twice I have shared the bench with strangers. I can't explain how we each knew the bench was important to the other, and that company was welcome. We just knew, that's all. We sat in silence and went our ways. And it was on that bench, the summer morning after my 50th birthday, that I came to that moment in life where one crosses over from the abstract intellectual knowledge that all human beings die to the active realization that I will die. Me, Fulghum, will not be, sooner or later. And not only did I realize that I will die, but I walked away thinking, well, it's okay. And I connect that moment of enlightenment with the peculiar sanctuary of that bench and whoever provided it. And I accept the challenge of my unknown benefactor to also leave behind some gift for the living, instead of a useless stone marking personal real estate. That bench will last hundreds of years. Many people will sit on it and think not of the name of its owner, but of the nameless joys of this sweet life and the mystery of death, and how utterly amazing it all is, and that somehow, in the end, things are just as they should be. I will close this audio presentation by quoting a kind of letter with which I end the book. I write to you on a Thursday night in February, the 40th day in the year 1989. It's winter in Seattle, Washington, USA. Clear skies, a new moon. Though life in writing and storytelling continue, for now I have come to the place where my work on this volume is done. Tomorrow the manuscript goes to New York and into production in a process that turns it into a book and later a tape. The letting go is not easy. It's like sending a child off to a finishing school. Now, some sharp-minded readers may notice that a few of the stories promised at the end of the book, All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten, did not show up in this one. How come? Answer: do you ever go off with a long grocery list and come home from the store with a bunch of different stuff, and somebody in the family unsacks the groceries and wants to know why you got this and why you didn't get that and just where is the whatever, and you want to say to them, well, just be glad I came back, okay? And the unpacker says, well, next time bring what's on the list, okay? And so, yes, the next time I will tell you about frogs, a sign in a grocery store in Pocatello, Idaho, the Salvation Navy, and the smallest circus in the world. I promise. Pretty soon now, I am going to get into my going to bed ritual mode. It's not unlike yours, I suppose. Walking through the house, I will turn off lights, check latches on doors, turn down the heat, and check the refrigerator one more time to see if anything like chocolate ice cream has miraculously appeared since the last time I looked around 9 o'clock. And then I'll find my way in the dark, by automatic pilot, up the stairs and into bed next to my sleeping wife. There's always a silent laugh at this moment, for she wears a black eye shade, so it's kind of like getting into the sack next to the Lone Ranger. I always liked the Lone Ranger, and I always say to myself, the faithful Tonto is here. It's my own dumb joke, and I never say it out loud anymore, but I think it, and I go to bed amused, which is not such a bad way to turn in for the night, silly joke or no. Anyway, next I will get my pillows all shoved around the way I like them, set the alarm, and lie back into that state of being that's somewhere between waking and sleeping. My daytime mind wants to continue sorting the incoming mail and working on the things to do list. But my going to bed mind will think, as I have thought as long as I can remember, this day was full. Tomorrow's work is for tomorrow. In the meantime, what I need is sleep. Everyone else is asleep, why not me? And if I sleep well, the task of another day will go well. Sleep, Fulghum, sleep. And I do. This is not exactly a bedtime prayer in the traditional sense, but it supposes peace through the night and hope for a productive life the next day. And that's prayer enough, I suppose. This particular night I go to bed with laughter on my mind. I have read through my stories one last time and surprised myself by finding parts that are still funny to me, even after many readings. Humor is a bit suspect, so I wonder if the funny parts should be trimmed out. I think not, and here's why. To get through this life and see it realistically poses a problem. There is indeed a dark, evil, hopeless side to life that includes suffering and death and ultimate oblivion as our earth falls into a dying sun. Nothing really matters. But on the other hand, the very best side of our humanity finds us determined to make life as meaningful as possible now, to defy our fate. Everything matters, everything. And it is easy to become immobilized between those 2 points of view, to see them both so clearly that one cannot decide what to do or be. Laughter is what gives me forward motion at such intersections. See, we are the only creatures that both laugh and weep, and I think it's because we are the only creatures who see the difference between the way things are and the way they might be. Tears bring relief, but laughter brings release. Some years ago, I came across a phrase in Greek, asbestos gelos, unquenchable laughter. I traced it to Homer's Iliad, where it was used to describe the laughter of the gods. That's my kind of laughter. And he who laughs lasts. Good night. Sleep loose.